Hi, I'm Charlie McKeever, your Happy Man coach, and in this video, we're talking about expectations, specifically expectations in marriage, and how they affect our relationship, how they can actually cause disconnection, how they can kill the intimacy and trust and connection in our marriage. So what do expectations look like? Expectations look like she's supposed to think a certain way, she's supposed to behave a certain way, that she's supposed to feel a certain way. You know, a lot of times in marriage, we start out with this idea that this is who I think I am, this is who I think you are, and this is who I think we'll be together. And then you go off to try to make that happen. And at first, both parties show up for that, even though each of them have a different story of their own in their head. They try to show up and do that thing, live out that story. But then things don't seem to match up. Things don't seem to line up. There can be a lot of disappointment. There can be disappointment because the other person doesn't act or think or feel the way that they should. There can be misalignment because things don't work out just naturally in life. But more importantly, there can be the misalignment because we've imagined something in our head that's almost impossible for life to match up to, because we have a very vivid, very rich imagination. So if something doesn't line up, it's because what's the odds that reality is going to 100% match our internal imaginings? So we have a pretty good high probability that we're going to be disappointed. This can cause confusion, frustration, maybe even resentment, that if it happens often enough, we start to blame the other person for it. We start to say, well, hey, you're supposed to do this, or you're not making me happy, or you're not doing that. And the other person can be confused by that because that's not something that they really ever agreed to. This is called a covert contract. It can be something that maybe even in our head that we've said, hey, I'll do this for you if you do that for me. And it can be based on a set of expectations of how things are supposed to go. And a lot of times we're not aware, especially as men, husbands, fathers, we're not aware of the story that we are agreeing to in our head. We don't know the rules that we've come up with in our head about how things are supposed to go. And we don't recognize where the disappointment actually lies. It lies in our thinking. And so we'll blame the other person. We'll project it onto the other person because in our head we have this story and the other person's involved in that story. And we have expectations of the other person in that story. And when those expectations don't get met, the ones that we came up with and agreed to, then we blame her for it. Now, I'm not talking about standards. I'm not talking about having boundaries. I'm not talking about knowing what you value. This is definitely something that I talk with men about. These are important topics that he needs clarity about. He needs to know what he values. He needs to know where the boundaries are, when it's appropriate to push back, when it's appropriate to say, no, that's not okay. He needs to know what's important to him and what his standards are for himself. Not only for himself, but of himself. What does he hold himself to? What kind of standard does he hold himself to? And what does he expect from others? Now, that expectations. This is something that we talk about extensively. When I talk with men, I talk about this extensively. What is it reasonable to expect for yourself and of yourself? And what is an expectation that's actually getting in the way of trust and intimacy and connection in your relationship? Because I guarantee you, if you're walking around mad, upset, believing that she should think or feel or do something in particular, and the reality isn't matching up, either you're in the wrong place in the wrong relationship, or your thoughts about the relationship are causing you relationship struggles. So if this is you, if you find yourself there, it's important to get really clear about what you believe, to really be able to recognize when you get upset about things, and then be able to track that back to your thoughts. Be able to understand what it is that you're thinking, what it is that you're hurt by, who is actually hurting you. Sometimes it's the other person, right? Sometimes it's the other person's words. Sometimes it's their behavior. Sometimes it's their expression of their feelings. But a lot of times it's us. We're participating in our own pain and we don't realize it. And so it's very important that we get a handle on our thoughts before we ever go outside of us and demand that anyone else be different. And this is what I help guys with all the time. So if that's you and you need some help, you want to talk about that, then there's going to be a link in the description that you can schedule a coaching call and we can talk about that. I can also introduce you to a community of men who are asking these same questions for themselves and getting clear. And it's not about giving her a pass, and it's not about being a nice guy, and it's not about pleasing her or any of that kind of stuff like that. It's about really getting to know yourself from the inside out, to know what you think about things, to know what's important to you, to know what your standards are, what your boundaries are, to really be able to separate what you expect of yourself and for yourself from some imagined unmet expectation that's hurting you in your thoughts. So if you're interested in that conversation, I'd love to have that with you. I guarantee that after that call, you'll feel more clear, more grounded, and more confident about where you're going. All right, brother, that's what I have for you today. Think about that. Think about your expectations. Where did they come from? And how's them being unmet hurting you? And where is that hurt actually coming from? Is it coming from the outside or is it coming from the inside? All right, I'll talk to you later.